To those of you joining, welcome. Settle in. We will be getting started around 6:31.
And Michael, my audio is fine with you. You can hear me clearly?
Yep, I can hear you
Great.
loud.
Great. Thank you.
Um, okay, so we're live on YouTube as well. So as soon as this presentation is over tonight, we'll be able to see it uh recorded.
Michael, how you feeling?
Better. I was sick a little bit yesterday, Robert,
Oh
and then
no, what'd you have?
I had like a flu symptom, so I had like a fever, like a regular, like went through the whole fever, cough, phlegm. But I feel better today. I feel like this morning was the big breaking point, and then
Oh,
Good, good.
Yeah.
I was worried yesterday that I wasn't going to have a voice to really do the Q&A at the end. But I'm
Oh boy, ouch, 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 ouch.
no, but I'm all good now. So
Good. Excellent.
yeah.
Excellent.
See. All right. For those of you who just joined, welcome to the webinar. We'll be getting started in about a couple minutes. Just let a few people come in. Welcome everyone who just joined. It's nice to talk. We'll be getting started in about a minute. Please settle in, and then we'll be getting started soon. I'll be making a few announcements on the chat as well as uh, on the chat, and then let people know about a few announcements before we start the show. I am going to put the link to the book on the chat now, and I'll be putting it throughout the night as well.
Great. And make sure to mention that discount code.
Yes, and then if you place this discount code, which I just paid to the chat, you should be able to get 30% off.
Great.
All right, I'll put that again towards the end, just so people go in later.
Super. Thank you.
Yeah, do we want to get started then? All right,
Yep.
okay, go ahead.
Okay. Welcome everyone to this evening's presentation. And this evening's presentation is called When the City Stopped: Stories from New York's Essential Workers. And we are so thrilled to have the author of that book with us here tonight. Robert W. Snyder is the author, and he's also the Manhattan Borough historian. and he's a great friend of our Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group. You'll hear more about the book, and when you get into the chat, you'll see that you can buy the book with a special discount. So our Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group, we do neighborhood history. Bloomingdale is the old historical name for the part of the Upper West Side and West 90s, West 100s, that area. We do presentations such as the one this evening. We also do neighborhood tours every month. We maintain a collection of historical papers in the Bloomingdale branch of the New York Public Library on West 100th Street. And we maintain a website of all that we do, which announces presentations, has prior presentations, has all sorts of interesting stuff, such as the dates that all 1,100 buildings in our neighborhood were built with the architects and things like that, and much, much else. You'll be very pleasantly surprised if you go to our website. Our website is upperwestsidehistory.org, upperwestsidehistory.org. But if you don't remember that, just Google Bloomingdale history, and you'll either get an illustrious history of the Bloomingdale store, the two brothers who founded that. That's a wonderful history. Or you'll get us, but I hope you'll get us. And you could also get us on YouTube with prior presentations. So sign up on our website and you'll get notified every presentation that we have. And you'll also get our quarterly bulletin. And we don't share emails with any other organization. So tonight we reflect on COVID-19, which happened only a few years ago. Lest we forget, the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group has a collection of photos and memories of the early days of the pandemic, and that too is posted on our website, upperwestsidehistory.org. You can also get an interview on the website with our fellow Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group member, Gil Tauber. Gil's known for so many things, but old historical streets in New York City and much, much else. But we did an extensive interview with Gil, who was personally affected by COVID-19. And maybe I'm giving a testimonial here because Gil just turned an amazing 90 years old, and he's still a pretty spry guy. But tonight we are pleased and proud to present our good friend. He's a big, good friend of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group, borough historian Robert W. Snyder. His book, When the City Stopped, has been getting lots and lots of attention. It's gotten reviews in the New York Times and the New Yorker, and he's been running around like crazy the last month, I'm sure, doing talks about the book and all of the interest in it. I know him from earlier books. Many of us do. Crossing Broadway was one of his great books. Transit Talk. And one of my old favorites that goes back to 1989, Voice of the City, Vaudeville and Popular Culture in New York. You'll have a treat with that. But the current book, you should get your hands on the current book. And again, in the chat, you'll see how to get it and how to get a discount in buying it. So with no more no more detail or inspiration, Rob, let's turn it over to you. And you could talk about the book any way you want. I'd be especially curious just to hear not how you came about thinking of what to write, but what you think what you hope that people are going to get from reading the book about, which is a compendium of people that actually experienced the COVID-19 firsthand.
Jim, thank you very much for that kind introduction and for all the work that you do for history in New York City. A wise man once told me that people get interested in a book when it explores people whose ideas, actions, and emotions matter. And I hope that's the case with When the City Stopped, Stories from New York's Essential Workers. Although the book explores an ordeal that many people would rather forget, the COVID-19 pandemic, I think the themes at the heart of this book are themes of enduring importance and interest: courage, solidarity, and empathy. The courage is the courage of essential workers who drove buses, ran subway trains, staffed hospitals, punched cash registered, answered 9/11 calls so that the rest of us might live and get on with our lives in a difficult and dangerous time. The solidarity is the solidarity of essential workers who showed up, went to work, helped each other, and served the public. And the empathy that's, I think, central to the book is the goal of building empathy between New Yorkers who experienced the pandemic in very different ways, from frontline workers to people who left the city to live in country houses. Both of them helped in their own way. The frontline workers in obvious ways, but the people who left the city for country houses kept themselves out of emergency rooms so that hospital workers would not be overwhelmed in the spring of 2020. This book has its origins in a working group of historians that I established early on in the pandemic. As borough historian, I started getting questions about COVID, about epidemics, and frankly, I don't know very much about epidemics. I don't know very much about viruses. So I sought out historians who were knowledgeable about those topics and referred reporters to them. But out of that grew some conversations among historians of medicine, public health, labor historians, urban historians, put our heads together in meetings over Zoom to answer the question, how can we help each other? How do we understand this event? Very early on, Josh Brown, who was then working at CUNY, said this is going to be as big as the Great Depression. And I think he turned out to be right, although it's consequential in ways that I think are very different from the Great Depression. But armed with the idea that we were wrestling with something really important in New York City in the spring of 2020, historians, archivists, documentarians, photographers all went to work in really different ways. At Fordham, students who were interviewing African Americans about life in the Bronx pivoted to interviewing Bronx residents about coping with COVID. At the Queens Memory Project, which has long been interested in interviewing and collecting artifacts from residents of Queens neighborhoods, people pivoted to COVID. In Staten Island, where people sometimes feel forgotten by the rest of the city, students in the history department got together and did oral history interviews over phones. The urban folklorists at City Lore started collecting poems and images that people produced in response to COVID, and even joined in a long group poem where people all around the city added lines and verses to a great big poem. And then finally, in some ways of enduring importance too, was a group at Brooklyn College. Librarians and archivists there joined in a national project called Journal of the Plague Year to pull together online a repository of artwork, writing, interviews, and more that helped illuminate Brooklyn's passage through the pandemic. The Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group brought material in this book to my attention, specifically photos by Paul Margolis that you can find inside the book. Also in the book are writings from Upper West Siders, 2 poems by the Upper West Side resident Rachel Haddis, and first-person narratives by Adele Dressner and Matilda Virgilio Clark of the Duro program on the Upper West Side. With all these historians working and gathering material, there was a big question looming over us. What are we going to do with all this stuff? And the original idea had been to create a single big digital archive, the kind that had been done after the 9/11 attacks in New York City. That digital archive today lives online at the Library of Congress. But plans for that fell through. I didn't see myself becoming a fundraiser to support it, nor did I think I had the technical skills to oversee a project like that. So I turned instead to doing something more traditional that I know about, and that's a book. I thought that there was an enormous amount of good material being collected. And I also thought that a book which is physical, which is portable, which is interactive, would be around for a long time, for many years to come. So with encouragement from a really good editor at Cornell University Press, I started working through more than 400 items. I had the help of 2 great interns, Gracia Brown and Brendan Reynolds. And we started to see recurring themes coming through in all the interviews. And as I started to hone down and think about how to work all those different interviews and their themes into a book, I knew that I couldn't do a statistically representative sample of all the people in New York City. And that's not what the book tries to do. Instead, it aims for a coherence of 3 important themes that frame everything that's in the book. Those themes are coping, suffering, and working. Everybody suffered, everybody coped in one way or another, but some people worked on the front lines to keep us all alive and keep us all going through with as normal a vision of everyday life as possible. And that meant putting an emphasis on essential workers. So what I'd like to do for a few minutes tonight is just read from a few of these interviews, excerpts from them really, to give you an idea of what folks were going through. In some cases, it may spark very familiar memories. In some cases, it might introduce you to things you've forgotten. In some cases, it might introduce you to a slice of life that you haven't had contact with before. I'm going to start with the words of Christopher Tedeschi, an emergency physician at the Columbia Medical Center and the Allen Hospital up in Inwood. Chris is a medical doctor. He was interviewed by the Columbia Oral History Project. And one of the things he talks about in his interview is how quickly we went from living in a normal way to living in an absolutely abnormal way in March of 2020, and how he experienced that in his emergency room. He said, we ramped up things really, really quickly because the number of patients was enormous. We were overwhelmed in many ways. The last week in March was the week where we saw the most patients in the ER. We were seeing more than 200 patients per day in the ER on 168th Street, just for COVID-19. No one came to the ER for anything else. We were joking for a month that nobody's had appendicitis in Manhattan. We still don't know what happened to them, or had a heart attack, or a stroke for that matter. The single memory I'll take with me clinically is of the Allen Hospital, our smaller hospital. It's on 220th Street in Broadway, Manhattan. It serves Inwood and Riverdale and part of the South Bronx. That's where one of the highest concentrations of cases were. Everybody always refers to the ER as organized chaos, as something tacky like that. But for the most part, things are not out of control. It's an emergency department. It's meant for emergencies. People get shot. That's what we're there for. When it becomes overwhelming, not only are you sailing through a storm, but you're not steering the boat. You're just hoping the boat doesn't tip over. In the hospital, we got to that point. And when I look back on it, I just see myself in the middle of the ER, in the middle of the night, making sure people's oxygen didn't run out. And it did. And that was not business as usual. One of Chris's friends in the medical world is an EMT named Phil Suarez, who was born in France, lived in Spain, and has worked for many, many years as an EMT on ambulances in New York City. He said he likes working in neighborhoods where there are lots of immigrants, and he thinks they need his services more there, and they're less inclined to be snobby about things. And he said also that when COVID hit, he could not imagine not going into work. He felt that he had a solemn obligation to live up to the needs of the people in the city that he serves. He had guidelines for safety, and he adhered to them all the time, but he saw some very rough stuff. I just want to read what he said about what was his hardest day. My worst day was April 6th or something like that. And one day I had a 15-year-old, a 25-year-old, a 42-year-old, and a 46-year-old in cardiac arrest. And they all died, except for the 25-year-old. The 15-year-old was difficult, but I knew she wasn't going to make it. It was 6 a.m. I logged onto our computer in the ambulance, and we get what's called a sprint, basically a transcription of the 911 call. And it says, 15-year-old cardiac arrest, CPR in progress by family. And I told the dispatcher, you're reading the same thing as I'm reading. It's a child in cardiac arrest. Can you send me somebody? I'm coming from a distance. I'm coming from Manhattan. And they're like, you're solo. Do your best. So we hauled over there to the Bronx. It's a 5th floor walk up. We load up 50 pounds of gear, go up 5 flights of stairs. At that point, fire got there. And she was asystolic, means her heart had stopped beating. We tried to work her up. I was very aggressive, obviously. And the best we got was a PEA, a pulseless electrical activity, briefly. Then she went right back into asystolic. And I knew there was nothing more I could have done, but it's still, I'm 15 years old. It obviously weighs very heavily on anyone. And the family was there. It was just very, very traumatic. but the rest of the day didn't get any better. And oddly enough, 3 of them that I had, they had the same scenario. They had these low symptoms and they were about to go into the shower. And then they went into cardiac arrest. And all of a sudden, they would just drop dead. And this 25-year-old was the same thing. It was bizarre. I don't know why. The 25-year-old, he had just gone down. I wanted to give him every chance. So I'm going to do an endotracheal intubation, means insert a tube into his windpipe to deliver oxygen, which is risky, obviously. And we worked him up for about 15 minutes and got him back. But how he did, I don't know. It was just too many patients to follow up on. But I think it was pretty promising. But unfortunately, don't know his final outcome. I hope it was good. I told myself that it was maybe good. So that was my worst day. I was averaging about 3 cardiac arrests a shift, which is unprecedented. That day was 4, but that day made it worse. Just the ages. It was such young people. And that just puts a lot into perspective. It's frustrating to read and to hear what we hear, knowing what we saw and witnessed. And I want to say that just to follow up on what Phil said, that one of the things that came through strongest in all the interviews that I read was that medical workers who were seeing dire conditions every day at work could go online at the end of the day and see people saying online that this COVID was nothing serious, that this was not that dangerous, and its lethality was being hyped and exaggerated. And they knew that in New York City in that time, that was not the case, and it made them really, really angry. One of the people who got very angry was Patricia Chu, a young woman from Queens, went to Hunter College at the time of the pandemic. She was working as a nurse at a New York Presbyterian facility on the east side of Manhattan. And she's working very hard as a nurse. And yet when she got home from her shifts, she would sit down in front of her camera and record monologues explaining to other nurses what she had gone through that day to prepare them for what they would face and to buck up their spirits in preparation for what they would see the next day. So I just want to say read a little bit from one of her interviews of April 6, 2020, when she went online. I'm wearing a bandana, not to look cute, because all of it's stress. My hair has started to fall out, which is not the worst thing in the world. It's hair. It'll grow back, but it's just really annoying. I'm now in hospital housing, which is basically a hotel. It was nice of them to offer, but I don't get a microwave here. I don't have any amenities, so I made the best of it. The last time I spoke, I said New York City was on fire. Well, welcome to hell, because we are basically at the gates of hell. We are very close to the tipping point, reaching the peak. We're almost there. We haven't reached it yet. I have accepted the fact that our government, our president, and no one is coming to help. So New York, it's just us. No one is coming to help us. And working in the ICU, the number one goal is basically to save as many lives as possible. Everybody's dying, and you're just doing your best to keep every single one of these people alive. Every minute that I have gone into work, you are working at like 150%. You don't even have time to think your own thoughts. You do everything you can to make sure they're breathing. The one thing I really feel is anger, and I'm angry. We are in war. New York is in war when we're by ourselves, and I've accepted that, but I'm never going to forget anything that's happened here. The nurses are being spread so thin, so thin. What they're asking for us to do is beyond God's work. We're going to keep fighting for our city. So just keep spreading awareness. Stay inside. But some people couldn't stay inside. Transit workers in particular had to go out and work and serve the public on buses and on subways. The only way that nurses like Patricia could get to work was on mass transit that would take them into the hospital. And one of those transit workers was Reagan Wheel, a bus operator and member of Local 100 of the Transport Workers Union. And when she was driving, the challenge was not just avoiding infection, which was a very real problem. More than 130 transit workers died during the pandemic. but also avoiding the hostility of passengers, some of whom got angry, some of whom we didn't want to put on masks in situations where it would have been very helpful for them to put on a mask. So Reagan recounted to me what it was like to drive a bus during COVID. She had a route that started on the west side near Lincoln Center and then went to Lower Manhattan. There was no traffic. We weren't picking up people. I've never seen Times Square empty. I mean, when I say empty, there were no parked cars at all. We still had to stay on schedule. A lot of us had to park our buses and wait before we could go to the next time point. We still couldn't be ahead of schedule. We didn't really have a lot of passengers, but when we did, sometimes it was a challenge to get them to keep their mask on. You would have some people coughing and sneezing, and that worried us. Most cooperated, but some didn't. If someone didn't cooperate, we would call it in because we didn't feel safe. They would send a supervisor to us, or sometimes we could put the bus out of service because it just wasn't safe for anyone if someone refuses to wear a mask. I had a man who came through the back door, sat in the back, and he was just hacking. He refused to put on a mask. The passengers asked him. I asked him, so I had to call it in. A supervisor came, put them off the bus. We would pick up the homeless when Port Authority kicked the homeless out. They had nowhere to go, and at that time it was still a little chilly. So they would come on the bus, which was kind of unsafe for us, because now you have mentally challenged on the bus as well, and you have people who you don't know, and you can't predict what they're going to do. I had one guy who made me nervous because he would just stand there and stare at me in the mirror. And he made me nervous to the point where I called it in. I didn't know what he was capable of. I didn't know what he was going to do. And I wasn't risking it. So I called it in. What you have to remember is that there wasn't a lot of people on the bus at that time. It was just him and me. And I wasn't taking that chance. I asked for assistance. One of the things that I think was toughest about the pandemic is that some people who hadn't anticipated danger or difficulty in their jobs on an immense scale had to face those challenges for the first time. Police officers, firefighters, they know they're going to face danger when they go into their line of work. Transit workers are really well aware that the transit system is a dangerous place, and they work all the time to avoid accidents and stay safe on the job. But some folks were suddenly thrust into very difficult circumstances. Cashiers who worked in supermarkets and drugstores, and I have interviews with a woman like that. You know, they were facing the danger of getting infected when people came past their cash register. And they not only served as cashiers, they were like customers' therapists. Maybe that person who was coming through the checkout line hadn't spoken to anybody directly in a week, and they tried to fit in a whole week's worth of sociability into one trip past the cash register. Also difficult were the lives of people who taught. Rachel Haddis has a lovely poem about teaching over Zoom during the pandemic. And there's also a really lovely reminiscence by Beth Evans, who's a librarian and a professor at Brooklyn College. And she wrote a long reminiscence about her experiences during the pandemic. And I published some excerpts from it in the book where she talked about her work in the library at Brooklyn College. She wrote, before the spring lockdown had even ended, 3 faculty and 2 staff at Brooklyn College died of coronavirus. All were loved by someone or other. I am sure those who loved them were ordinary people for the most part. I knew the 2 office staff died, one briefly because of work I did on a search committee at the college, and the other because our lives intersected at many points. Jay was a man who delighted in meeting people, remembered everyone he met, checked in with everyone regularly, and died too young at 31. He overlapped with one of my daughters during their high school years, walked into the Brooklyn College library as an undergraduate interested in exploring the possibility of a career as a librarian, and showed up frequently in an office in Boylan Hall when I accepted a part-time position across campus as a dean's faculty fellow. Jay sent me one of his typical thoughtful and engagingly written periodic emails near the start of the pandemic, about a week after the campus had moved to online instruction, and 2 days after the governor called for a statewide pause in all business operations. By this point in our lives, Jay had gotten comfortable enough to call me by my first name, although I still have a cachet of his emails that address me as Professor Evans. He was concerned that I had stocked up on essentials during these crazy times, and I wrote back to him that I looked forward to seeing him on the other end of this. No, Jay, regrettably, I will not see you on the other end of this. Neither is any of us sure or when we will come to an end of this. Jay seems to have had a very long list of folks with whom he took the time to check in regularly. A colleague commented on that learning more about Jay after his death has left her with a surprised feeling one would have who suddenly discovered that her loving husband had dozens of other wives. She was stunned at first, even hurt. I thought I was his special one, she said. She quickly came to realize, of course, that someone as thoughtful as Jay could only be the same someone who showed thoughtfulness for everyone he met. There are a lot of interviews in the book. I could go on, but let's talk and hear from folks and entertain questions, and then I'll come back to one more good poem that is, I think, quite uplifting at the very end.
Okay. Michael, you're looking at the chat and some of the comments and questions. While you're quickly doing that, I just want to mention, I'm going to emphasize, Rob, that in case people don't know, you're the Professor Emeritus at American Studies and Journalism at Rutgers University. And boy, the journalism comes through very strongly with these compelling stories. And of course, the history is there. Our most esteemed member of our Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group, Wynn Armstrong, always reminds us that what's happening today is history in the making.
Yes.
And your book actively, exudes that. So what have we got, Michael?
All right, let's see. I'm gonna have I have Barbara Becker and Mimi McDermott. I'm gonna allow them to talk and ask their questions, have a conversation directly.
And can you make Barbara live?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. And in case people don't know, Barbara's an author of a wonderful book, Heartwood, about hospice care, patient as a medical observer, and she'll tell us maybe a little bit more about that with her chat question.
Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for this informative evening. I'm so grateful to Wynn Armstrong for telling me about it and putting it on my radar. Robert, when you were talking about solidarity and empathy, it made me think, let me see if I can join as a here we go. But it made me think about the time I spent during the pandemic when I wasn't working with an elderly relative who was in one of the nursing homes and we were not able to see her in the final days of her life. I was serving in New York City as an interfaith chaplain, and the mayor's office invited me and other chaplains to join them for interfaith services for people who died, who were going to be buried in our Potter's Field on Hart Island. So I performed a number of services for people who we may never know who they were. Coffins were being stacked one on top of the other, and the only person who had access to Hart Island during that time was the city's official chaplain who worked for Rikers Island, and the rest of us were only able to join on Zoom. But it was an incredible feeling of solidarity for the chaplains who really didn't have any outlets for the grief that they were feeling. And it was just an incredible opportunity to express empathy for all of the people who were here without a relative to claim their body, who might not even know that they had passed away. And it really was quite a moving experience. And I did thank you, Jim, for mentioning my book, Heartwood, The Art of Living with the End in Mind, because I did write a little bit about that in my book. But thank you. Thank you for this wonderful evening.
Thank you for the work you did, and I hope you sit down for an oral history interview about this. I really think it would be very, very valuable.
I would love to do it. I really would.
Okay, we'll figure out how to make this happen. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, Angel, I'm gonna let you ask a question here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Hi, thank you for your talk. I had a couple of, one is you triggered for me. I lost my twin brother during COVID. He was in a nursing home, so the previous talker kind of triggered that for me, and it was difficult not being able to connect with him directly. But I had a question. Were you impacted personally as well? I assume we all were, but I mean in a particular way. And secondly, your book is not audio, but one thing that always resonated with me were the pots and pans. And did you capture that in the book? Any photos of that? Or I used to have this horn that people use in soccer matches, very obnoxious horn that I would stick out the window on Amsterdam Avenue. So I just wanted to kind of maybe hear your reminiscences about that. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. There were people in my orbit who died. I was fortunate no one who was really close to me died, but two people I know professionally who I was always supposed to sit down with for talks. One was the sociologist at City College who wrote the book, The New York That Nobody Knows. One was a guy who taught at CUNY also and wrote about architecture and city life. I was supposed to talk with him. Never got around to doing it. I'm never going to get to talk to him. One of my closest colleagues at Rutgers lost her dad in the Bronx. But, you know, I was fortunate that no one in my immediate family died of COVID. Interestingly, as I edited the interviews, and the editing was a long process, I would sort of edit away what was extraneous, but preserve the core, and then finally show the finished edited version to each person who gave an interview to make sure that I hadn't distorted their meanings. I got to feel like I knew these people very well. I'd never seen their face ever until we'd maybe meet in person when the book came out. But I got to know them very, very well, and their ordeals became very real to me. And I think mostly with Veronica Fletcher, a wonderful woman whose husband, Trevor Fletcher, was a mechanic for the MTA. And he loved working on buses. He loved working for the Transit Authority. He would always go to MTA weekend at Six Flags with his kids. You know, he really loved his job. And he died of COVID. And Veronica recounted in painful detail what that was like to experience. And at one point in the interview, Veronica was crying and I was crying. And I said to her, do you want to stop? You know, and she said, no, I really want to do this. I said, all right, if you can do it, I can do it too. And we completed the interview. Although no one close to me died, I grew to feel very close to the people who shared their stories with me. I was very sad to hear that one woman, Jessica Martinez, who is an international authority on public health and viruses, was very careful and worked from home throughout the pandemic. She now has long COVID. You know, this most careful of people is sick a lot now. So, you know, she's a reminder that this experience is not over for a lot of folks, and it is something that is still hard for them to endure. I do have a wonderful reminiscence about the evening cheers written by Led Black, a blogger in Washington Heights, a Dominican American journalist and cultural analyst. I think Led's piece on the cheers is absolutely terrific, and I'm glad I could put it in the book. I also think that not only did those cheers sustain frontline workers, but they also sustained the people who were doing the cheering. You'd been cooped up all day in your apartment, and then, you know, at 7 p.m., you could stick your head out the window and see people. I remember a woman, like I live on East 81st Street. She lives probably on 82nd, and I would see her across the rooftops banging her pan, and I'd wave to her. I've never met her. I don't know who she is at all. But every now and then, when I stuck my head out to cheer at 7 p.m., I'd look for her and I'd wave, and she'd wave back to me. And it gave me a greater sense of being connected to others in a time when human connections seemed severed for a while.
Michael?
Yeah, so I was going to let Vita Wallace actually also join us a little bit and talk about the project that the history group here did during the pandemic. It was basically, I'll let her explain a little bit about the 2020 project.
Hi, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Hi, Jim, and hi, Rob.
Hi, Vita.
Everybody. The history group wanted to do something to help capture the history that was going on at the time. And I think that Rob Snyder actually had sent some kind of a message encouraging groups to do this. And we picked up on that. And John Gorham and I put together a place online where people could submit paragraphs or photographs about their experiences. And actually, a photography group in Bloomingdale Aging in Place did a lot of the work that initially filled our collection, and then many other people added drawings and memories, and even I got sent one script of a play to include. All of this is still easily accessible. If anybody's interested, you go to our website at upperwestsidehistory.org and you click on resources, and then you scroll down to 2020 project. So I don't know whether I personally am ready to enjoy going back to those things, but I'm glad that they're there for people in the future to be able to get a better sense of what life was like during this period. And thank you, Rob, for everything you did to encourage people to capture that moment.
Well, thank you for the work. Thank you for the work you did. And I recall vividly, in particular, you got a lot of good visual stuff, not just Paul's photographs, some of which are in my book, but wonderful drawings as well, right?
Yes.
And they capture the texture of everyday life, outdoor concerts, for example, right? That were put on during the times of lockdown. I think those things can be studied again and again and again in the future in useful ways.
No, yeah, so I put the link for that project on the chat here for everyone to see. And yeah, it does capture basically everything that people submitted, personal items of like their interior apartment to signations that they saw, explorations. And as someone who was actively like cycling, learning to like cycling throughout this period too, it's just like getting to see the city through all these different lenses, which is really really amazing. And so before I actually go on to a little bit further here, I have Charles Shorter from the Ryan Health. I don't know if he wants let him talk, see if he wants to chime in about his experience there.
And while we're making the connection there, I'm just going to advise everyone, first of all, get this book. I hope you get a sense how compelling it is. And this is now the definitive history of the COVID experience in Manhattan. And we are so fortunate that Charles Shorter joined in. He is the executive director. He's the guy in charge of the Ryan Health Center. Wow. Congressman Ryan, who passed away, if you may remember, almost like 50 years ago, and his widow at the time took over his responsibilities in Congress for a short period. But the Ryan Health Center, of course, has a huge presence in our Bloomingdale neighborhood and even surrounding areas extending into Harlem and other places. So we're so fortunate to have that perspective from Charles Shorter, the director.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. Mr. Snyder, thank you so much in framing the conversation. So I am Charles Shorter. I am actually the Chief of Community Engagement and Strategic Partnerships, and I was the Executive Director of our two sites in Harlem at the time of the pandemic. And we're, as Mr. Mackin said, we are 60-year plus community health center providing primary and ancillary services to the community, regardless to the ability to pay. And we are named after the congressman. So our experience, and again, Mr. Snyder, we're a community health center and we're tasked with taking care of primary care, diabetes, hypertension, and then we get hit with this pandemic. And so how do we pivot? We also have a very strong relationship with St. Luke's Mount Sinai Hospital, and we had a residency program. So in March, and the residents provide primary care across our sites. And in March, when it was declared a pandemic, the hospital said, we need those residents back at the hospital. And again, you did a fantastic job of really showing how the hospitals were affected. But as a primary care community health center, how were we affected? Primarily our staff are community members. They're essential workers. They're coming from the same communities, Washington Heights, Harlem, South Bronx, and they're essential workers. You talked about going to work and not necessarily thinking that your life is going to be in danger. This was now their life. So they're working and riding the trains, riding the subways, coming into the centers, trying to provide services, those other services to keep people healthy, diabetes, hypertension, other issues. People are getting tested for COVID, getting them to the hospitals. We were able to provide some telehealth. We pivoted and did some telehealth for some services that could be done telephonically, particularly some mental health and those types of services, but we still remained open. And then we were very lucky that we didn't have to close any of the centers, but we were asked very early on in the pandemic to provide a testing site, a COVID testing site. So one of our sites, we pivoted and we made it a testing site for the governor and the state of New York. And I think we did over probably about 6,000 tests at that site in Harlem. And then conversely, as the pandemic continued, we became a COVID vaccine site, and we continued to do that work. We were very lucky in the sense that I think we, out of about 500 staff members, we lost one staff member to COVID, but the collateral damage, we had a lot of staff members who lost their family members, and I'm actually one of them. My sister died very early on in the pandemic, April 8th. And, so I think the young lady had just said a little triggering. It's a little triggering, but just kind of remembering and being in the mix. My sister lived in the Bronx. My story's not unique. She went in, she didn't come out. We weren't able to see her. And that happened not only to me, but my other colleagues at work. So getting to work, going home to work, dealing with patients who are coming into the building and saying, I don't believe this. Like you said, Mr. Snyder, I don't believe this. I don't really think that this is a big deal. I'm not going to put on a mask. And then having to deal with those types of things and ask people to put on masks, going home, having conversations with your family, where your family doesn't particularly think that this is such a big deal, and not having the choice that you can stay home. Some of our workers are, the inequity of the situations just became snowballed, mushroom. Folks can't stay and not get paid, so they had to go to work. You had to open the bodega. You had to have the daycare as much as possible, so your life could continue and then you could provide for your family. So it wasn't, and the hospitals did a fantastic job, but the ancillary services, all of those workers and staff members that were drawn into the situation has profound effects. And thanks again, because there are a lot of memorials and opportunities to memorialize this, and I think that that should absolutely continue, lest we forget how this pandemic was so severe. So thank you for letting me talk about our experience. Appreciate it.
Thank you for all that you did, and I'm really sorry for your loss. I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. And Rob, yeah, just to go bringing it back to the interviews that you discussed earlier in the presentation. It's actually very glad to see that I believe you interviewed Beth at Brooklyn College, who I just got the pleasure of meeting just this past month, actually.
I didn't interview her. I actually excerpted something long she wrote that was quite beautiful about how she sheltered in place with her family and what that felt like, and then also what it felt like to do her work over Zoom, in effect, you know, during the pandemic. So it's good that you got to meet her. She's great.
Yeah, I know, and even through obviously the bid was also very active during that time, and we became like a source of face mask distribution site, as well as like PPE for businesses in the neighborhood. And so figuring that out in the first couple of years, the first couple months of like, how is this going to work? You know, how are people going to come in? Trying to get the word out on what businesses were doing delivery services. And you know, it was again the whole cycle of getting to know the neighborhood in a different point of view, and having to go around and say, hey, you know, knock on businesses' doors and be like, are you guys open? Are you guys doing business? Obviously they're not doing sit down, so I couldn't tell if they were open all the time, but if they were, there were people coming out, like food coming out, that I could say, oh, you know, like people, let people know that you guys are doing deliveries now.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a lot of stories that happened during that time, and glad that you were able to put those together, especially for the community of like New York City, Bloomingdale, and in general, just people that were affected.
You know, one thing I just recommend is that just as the COVID experience is not over. I mean, there are people out there still with long COVID, and lots of people who lived through it in good shape are still reflecting on it. And I think people should continue to do oral history interviews. I think this process of figuring out what we remember, what we don't remember, how we make sense of this event in retrospect, it's really important to talk to people about this. And I also think that sometimes giving an interview like this can be a therapeutic experience for people. It's no substitute for a trained professional sitting down with you to talk about what you went through. But I still think it can often feel better to reflect on this and get out some of the stuff that people went through.
No, yeah, of course. And it's been great, you know, like getting to listen to more stories around. I feel like I definitely haven't had the chance to talk to many professionals and the you know, working in the medical background about their experiences, and also it also seemed like a very that side of that story has been unknown to me, besides the, you know, the news stories that were covered. And in general, yeah, it's there's so many angles that I probably can't imagine of listening. We have one more person that wants to ask a question.
Sure.
Let Peter Arnson here. Peter Arnson was the was the director during of the bid during the COVID.
Yes.
And Michael talked about, you can hear me, I take it?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Michael talked about, you know, giving out masks and trying to work out the payments to keep businesses afloat. And it was just, I'm just, my own reminiscences are going down empty streets past businesses that we had loved and that we wanted to have come back, and not having any idea for months whether that was going to be a possibility. Going out at 6 a.m. to be able to say thank you to the sanitation workers. And that's one of the things that really comes back, or that is continued for me, is just the appreciation and being able to say thank you to people in the neighborhood. We have St. Luke's, at Mount Sinai, just north of us. And you would see doctors, aides, others going in and coming home exhausted. And you didn't want to give them, I mean, you wanted to give them a hug, but you couldn't. You were keeping a distance and trying to talk, 5 to 10 feet away. And, it was just, they were going through so much that it was, they were really on the front lines. The sanitation workers, though, they'd be out there in a truck with another person, and they'd be just working hard to try and keep the streets clean at a really difficult time when the rat population was taking over.
Hmm.
And oh my, just so many different things that come up. I mean, one of the things that I really appreciated was when the city gave us a chance to do an open street on Amsterdam Avenue, which went against their guidelines. They should never have done that according to their guidelines, but they knew that we had some reputation for doing things pretty well in that way from prior programs, and they gave us that opportunity. And just to be out there and have people walking up and down the streets in the open air was really a relief to so many people and so many families. And we lost a number of people. I one of the ones that comes to mind is a pharmacist on 109th and Columbus, and just had his picture up, had a grandmother who would come out for street fairs with Dominican food and share that. People from the neighborhood that we lost, and I'm going to stop there, but it was a major change, and it affected. I mean, Michael and I certainly were affected. It pushed our endurance as it was, but in any case, thank you for this talk. Thank you for the book.
Thank you.
Michael and
Thank you
Jim.
for your work.
Thank you, Peter. And then Rob, did you want to read that poem?
Yeah, because this is tough stuff. And yet in the middle of this tough stuff, it's really important to remember that there are people who did great things for each other. And I just want to read a poem by Ron Colm. He's a poet. He lives in Long Island City. He had a long career in bookstores that came to an end during the pandemic. And he was on unemployment, and he took the subway from Queens into Manhattan. And then he witnessed an incident and recorded it in this poem. I had to travel into Manhattan to cash my unemployment check. So I sat in the front car, wearing a mask, doing my best to avoid the other passengers. After leaving the bank, I walked back to Union Square Station and found a place on the platform where there weren't too many people standing around waiting. Time goes by and no train appears. There's a sudden movement as a woman, maybe late 50s, tosses her bag and her mask onto the tracks, then clumsily climbs down and joins them. "Hey, what's up?" I shout through my mask. She moans and says that this is how she's going to get home. She's tired of everything. She edges toward the third rail. And unfortunately, because my back is so messed up, I can't physically grab her. So I unleash my best zinger. "Do you believe in any kind of God? Because if you do, you got to know how pissed off he or she's going to be if you touch that thing." A young guy comes running over, jumps onto the tracks, and lifts the lady up, depositing her on the platform. He holds her, waiting for the police, who do show up pretty quickly. My train finally arrives and I go home, amazed at how the universe works.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody who turned out. Thank you for everybody who shared their really important memories.
Thank you again. Good night now.
All right. Good night, all. Thank you very much.
All right. Good night, everyone.